6 years is a long time to be absent from life, but it is an entire era online. This is the story of a man who spent 6 years in prison in Iran over his web activities, and when freed, found an entirely different internet. I am Hossein Derakhshan. I was freed from jail in November 2014. I used to have a popular blog called Editor myself, and because of my serious efforts to promote blogs, they gave me the funny title of Blog Father here. Tehran has changed a lot during this time. Many old houses are replaced by high-rise luxurious condos. There are new roads, new highways, and many big SUVs. There are numerous large billboards with advertising for Swiss-made watches and Korean flat-screen TVs. And everybody seems more colorful and stylish, especially women. And hundreds of new cafes have opened up with Western music and female staff. This was all a huge surprise to me. The most shocking thing for me was how the internet had changed. I had heard about social networks' importance, and I knew that now everybody used them. What I didn't know was that they had not just killed blogging as I knew it, but also they had stolen most of our readers. Writing and publishing in social media was not much different from writing in a blog, but getting your posts read, or at least viewed by them, had become a big challenge. I started my blog, a new one, in Persian, about books and ideas, and I knew that I had to share it on social media, so I shared it on Facebook and Twitter. But in the first few days, it only received 4, 5, 6 likes. I started to think and reflect, and I used social networks to share my thoughts. Gradually, I realized that blogs are practically dead. And the reason for that was not the social networks per se. It was their treatment of hyperlinks and the philosophy behind their algorithms of representation, or what is now called the stream. Facebook's newsfeed is a stream. The idea is that not everyone's posts are interesting for you. So Facebook's algorithms pick the ones that are more recent, and they have already received some likes, and they're about topics that you've already shown an interest in. In other words, the stream equates importance with newness and popularity. This is exactly like the real world, where youth and fame, or better to say, young celebrities, have dominated our cultures. Sadly, the once utopian virtual world is finally catching up with the depressing rules of the real world. Meanwhile, social networks are obsessively trying to keep us inside. So they are not big fans of hyperlinks, which take their users outside. Some, like Instagram, are simply preventing hyperlinks. Others, like Facebook, are degrading the hyperlink. Facebook only allows one link in a post, which is separate from the text, not part of it. It then treats that link like an object rather than a relation between inside and outside. It strips the hyperlink of its diversifying and decentralizing powers. The rise of the stream and the fall of hyperlinks have resulted in a very different internet compared to 6 years ago. Web pages outside social networks are dying, and there are less and less people who are clicking on links in their newsfeeds. They're also much less exposed to different opinion than before. Because of this tyranny of the popular, minority views are quashed and they are being radicalized as a result. The truth is that the internet is much less diverse now. Apart from deviating from the web's diverse nature, the internet is also becoming quite centralized with social networks. Now, huge amounts of user-generated content is kept within social networks' gigantic databases. We hardly own what we produce, and the risk of losing them is very high. Also, we are giving so much detail about our preferences that we have become extremely predictable to states and big corporations. And predictability means control. A recent study shows that Facebook can know you better than your parents with only 150 likes, and even better than your spouses with 300 likes. I think human race has never been so naked and so powerless. Blogs used to be the closest form to the vision of Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web. They provided a non-sequential, decentralized, active, and diverse way of representing information. With Facebook, blogs are dead. Now the internet is defined not by an interconnected collection of websites, but by a series of disconnected and centralized social networks and mobile apps that are gradually making web browsers irrelevant. The web started from academia. It involved lots of thinking, reading, and debating. It had an unprecedented intellectual power. But now the social networks are making it more of entertainment. This centralized, linear, programmed, and inward-looking medium is not the internet as we knew it. It is television. When we log on to Facebook, our personal television starts broadcasting, with more and more still and moving images or short paragraphs of text. And it all is individually tailored for us according to our preferences. Perhaps there is no way to save the web. The shift from what I call library internet to TV internet is sadly inevitable, as billions of people are connecting. After all, television is one of the few cultural forms that is still rapidly growing all around the world. It now dominates media, arts, and even politics. But that doesn't mean we have to give up. If we care about peace in our complicated world, and if we know about the great potentials that the internet had, we need to resist and fight to keep that vision alive.
Okay, so Katie and I both hadn't seen this before, whereas Markus and Hossein obviously both had. Just a tiny piece of context. I'm here from Toronto. I've spent 2 years watching and being an advocate for public control of the smart city, so to speak. There's been a Sidewalk Labs project that's been happening in my city. And so I'm super keen to hear Katie's take on the video. But I also want to say, I guess just to start it up, is that I found me and my little blog in the little fight I was fighting with others in Toronto had a lot of power. And this is 2018, 2019. And I would write things down, and no one would really read it, but then I'd have somebody pop up from the government and be like, hey, I'm glad you're writing. And I'm like, ooh, good. So maybe I don't know who's reading my writings. And I think the only thing I want to say is not like, ooh, that's so important, but just to say that like all of the things that I've seen happen in the last decade, I've seen a lot of people caution against the idea that it's the technology, it's always the people. You know, like whether it was in Tehran, whether it was in, like I think a lot of things have been assigned to Twitter or to Facebook, but at the heart of the resistance and the fighting are the humans. And so I don't want us to assign too much power, and I think this is my critique and my challenge to you, but first I want to hear from Katie, to the platforms and to the technology. When the humans stand up and use this stuff, it's actually the humans standing up and using this stuff that leverage it and then can go. So I feel like really excited about still the sort of what the technology is, given a lot of the challenges that we have to navigate to be heard. So not that it's zero, but I think there's a tension there. So that was my immediate reaction, was like, wait, I was still useful even though I know everything you're saying is true. So I'm a big fan of holding on to two truths at once. That's kind of my thing. So Katie, what were your thoughts seeing that?
Yeah, thank you. I think first I want to say that, seeing the notes on control and predictability in terms of what we're putting out into the interwebs really strikes a chord, especially if you've been hearing at all about, or any of the conversations here about surveillance. We are, especially here in Detroit, very much, I think, left in the dark in terms of who knows what about us and how that impacts the resources we have in our communities, the development that happens in our communities, but also, speaking for the activist groups here, what the implications are when we are out in the streets and challenging those in power. Often, a lot of our organizing does happen via social media. Often, a lot of the work, be it coalition work or within established organizations, is held in Google Docs. So that's one piece that really stuck out to me just, off the bat. But from my perspective at DCTP, and even the broader AMP universe, for those who know Allied Media Projects, we define media and technology very broadly. So technology to some may be cooking or dancing, whereas to others it's coding or building a wireless network. So part of what we do when we are bringing people into the fold of internet connectivity is try to demystify technology in a way that allows someone to step from the role of a mere consumer to a producer of media, and also hopefully then the next step is nudging them into governance. So how we can build power to then be governing the technologies that more often than not are actually oppressing us. So in thinking about the role of, or in thinking about—
If you're in this room and you're talking, it would be great if you could stop, because it's really hard to hear.
Oh, yeah,
so please, thank you.
Thinking about the role of content creation, generation of media for our communities, we think a lot about what that means on a neighborhood level, just like we think about what internet connectivity means on a neighborhood level. So we develop, as part of the wireless networks, an intranet where some of you may be familiar with an intranet from working in an office place. So you're not necessarily going out into the web, you're connected on your local area network, so you're able to, say, chat or share files with some of your colleagues, if that's a helpful example. So we're doing that on a neighborhood level so that if, let's say, there's some sort of disruption in the neighborhood, there's a flood or something like that, you're able to connect to a message board that's independent of an internet signal. So you're able to connect with one another in emergency situations, but more broadly, you're able to connect by sharing stories. Detroit, as many of you hopefully know by now, if you're not already from here, we're struggling against gentrification like many other cities. And what is important to us here is the preservation of our histories, our stories, and what makes Detroit special. And ask anyone that's been here for any amount of time, what makes us special is the people. So to kind of shed a more positive light in terms of what content or media creation can be, for us it's a lot of focus on preservation of histories.
Good. And so Hossein and Markus, I want to hear from you both on this. I mean, given that a bit of time has passed since this happened, but also, sometimes I think we're downplaying the extent to which there's monopolization of infrastructures. I sometimes like to say these nice, hopeful things about the internet, and it's like the magician's hands things where we're all looking at one point and ignoring the fact that there's we're back to Standard Oil, sugar, we're back to monopoly situations that we haven't seen for a long time. And so, how do you feel today? I mean, like really right now, this afternoon, about all of these things.
Yeah.
Do you feel the same as the movie? Do you feel a little bit different? Do you feel a lot different? Where are you?
No, I think I've developed some sort of more general narrative about how things are happening. This was a micro look, kind of, at how the internet has shifted. But the time, I missed this part from my biography, but last year I was doing a fellowship at Harvard Kennedy School and MIT Media Lab, and there I started to think about expanding this explanations about this shift to wider society. So what I think, and actually even maybe it's a bit more philosophical in a way, because I think every trend that we are observing in all kinds of aspects of the society and politics and culture is a kind of departure from the Enlightenment towards the post-Enlightenment era, which is defined by three trends, by three flows. One is the shift from text to images, which is obviously very visible for us who are involved in technology, because when you see, for example, the shift from the peak of Twitter to the peak of Instagram, for example, and then another trend is which probably at the center of the shift from Enlightenment to post-Enlightenment, which is the shift from the centrality of rationality to the centrality of emotions or affect. This is also a very, very big trend that you could observe in many aspects of lives, especially about technologies. And then another flow, another shift in a way, has been the gradual departure from, or the gradual crumbling of anything that was public to two things: personalized and privatized. The privatization of the public has been talked about a lot, but the personalization of the public is also another trend that I think is helping the ultimate project of neoliberalism, which is prediction. Prediction, I think, has never been, throughout history, predictive technologies have never been so efficient.
Okay, but this is a great point for me to jump off to challenge you a bit, which is like, it took me a long time to understand that data is not factual, it's a proxy. It's not you. It's a representation of you. And Katie, to your point, as the surveillance mounts, people start to perform. I know people who have multiple, and I'm sure many of you do, ways to evade. And so I think there's so much bad data going into this concept of prediction that I just think it may be faulty to assume that there's so much truth on the internet when there may be a lot of garbage. And predicting upon garbage, which is garbage by design, is going to get you into, whatever else by design. Like I think there's a very, very helpful lack of complexity in understanding power structures in white nationalism, and the realities that aren't on the internet. They're just in our politics. So I'm hesitant to assign too much to the internet edge of this versus like the core of it all. So I'm going to come to you, Markus, on this. But just a quick reaction from you, like, do you really think that prediction is that dangerous? And I'm glad we can talk about it, because I don't know that I do. I guess you can hear it from me.
Because much of the data that we produce is inevitable. We can't really control that data that is being produced about us. We might be able to resist some aspects of it. We can maybe obfuscate, or we can confuse, or we can contaminate some of the data that is produced about us. But much of it is actually produced without even our knowledge or control. For example, the Internet of Things that is happening, expanding many things that we are inevitably using, from geolocations to when we use different kinds of public facilities or private facilities. So yes, to a certain degree, we can resist it that way, but the data that we produce is making us ultimately much more predictable than ever in history.
Okay, Markus, what's your reaction to this? And then I'm going to come to the audience, even though I can't see
I would-
you. If we're like not talking about something of interest to you, we definitely want to change. And if you have questions and prompts, we want to take them. So,
I would agree with Hossein. We started both blogging in the early 2000s, and that was a time where you were self-hosting your blog. It was about, we created some kind of a public sphere on the internet, the blogosphere here in Iran. I'm in Germany with lots of other blogs being connected. And now 15 years later, we are totally dependent on a privatized public sphere owned by only a few companies who have the power to create our reality through their timelines and to collect lots of data and do a lot of predictions about whether the data is correct or not. And we haven't found any ways yet to democratize it, to find checks and balances, because these companies, they have absolutely too much power over our societies worldwide. And we have absolutely no rights against them. For example, WhatsApp in Germany, it's used by 91% of the under 30-year-old. You can't really say, I'm not using WhatsApp if you go to school, because then you get no information anymore what the other people are talking. But WhatsApp has a right to say, okay, because of our terms of services, you are out. Sorry.
Right.
And so we need to fight for several rights. We need to fight for the right to get access to the internet. We don't have it yet. We need the right to be part of these privatized public spheres. We need to fight for alternatives who are not privatized. And we need to fight for digital rights in general, for example, privacy rights. We have in Germany the right for informational self-determination. So in theory, I have the right to know what these companies know about me. In practical, it's useless, because even our data protectioners can't really see what's going on the servers of Google and co. And we need to fix it.
So for me, this comes back really quick. I'm going to give you a little bit of a Canada example, which I think is interesting in this context, is that we have, which is different than European laws, we have 2 federal privacy laws. So the way the government manages your data is a different law than the way companies manage your data. And I have fought for those to be kept separate, because I think the role of the state and the way it manages and uses data is part of the social contract. It's like, I know about you, and I'm going to use this stuff to deliver better services. At the same time, the state has been a violent disaster in Canada. So that's not clear cut, but it's different than what a company would do with data. And so I think, like, I always struggle looking to Europe as, like, for leadership on this stuff, because you've merged it all into one thing, which I find, like, somewhat confusing, because we're talking about privatization. And so I think, Katie, I'm curious to hear from you, like, to what extent and capacity, like, can you see from, and I heard this earlier today too, it's kind of like, forget the institutions, just like, let's just start doing the thing we need to do, which breaks my heart as someone who wants to believe in democracy and institutions to carry the load. But I mean, I feel like Detroit kind of said, you know what? You're not showing up for me, so we're going to figure it out ourselves. Like, is that a right way to characterize the ethos of?
That's apt, yeah. People did not have a choice but to find the solutions for themselves and for their neighbors. So that is a common thread through any sort of solution making here. Right. So in the sphere of food and food justice, all the way through to digital justice as well. So we are a principled organization. We function almost entirely, checking ourselves against the Detroit Digital Justice Coalition's digital justice principles, one of those being common ownership. And I'm by no means saying that we are experts in common ownership, but what I am saying is that we are looking at how we can continue to take steps towards common ownership, and that includes infrastructure. Right. So we are looking at how we can organize to understand how we can own more of our own data, but also how we can work towards owning something that really will prevent kind of the unchecked nature of data in the world.
Right, because like something I get concerned about, I don't know if anybody following the smart cities discussion, but a lot of people look to cities like Barcelona or Amsterdam because they say, well, they have a digital commons where they say our data is a shared asset, it's a public asset. And I struggle with this a lot because like I think globally we're ignoring the problem, which is this. On one hand, nations are betting their economic futures on data, artificial intelligence, chips, AI, and at the same time, we as people are saying, maybe that input is a toxic asset. Like maybe the thing you need to grow your companies and to grow your capacity in the technology sector is the very input that we don't want to provide. So now what do we do? And this to me is the circle of hell that we're in right now, which is you see a lot of companies sort of trying to be like, well, we don't want to we don't want to stifle economic development, so we want to let your data forth, but let's make it a public asset. And I'm in my head thinking like, yeah, me and you having access to that data set is not the same thing as the big tech companies having access to it. And so I think there's a tension in economic development that I'm a little bit nervous about because I don't see enough adults at the table who know technology to say, we can do robotics, we can do hardware, we can do stuff that doesn't rely on data and be innovative. Like the future is not surveillant necessarily if you understand technology. But I don't see that confidence in the leadership. So I mean, Markus, like you're part of the European Union. You got countries in there who are jostling to not, be following America or China. But do you see this problem?
Yeah, sure. and we are thinking about creating alternatives. One alternative is privacy-enhancing tools, for example. You don't need to go to Google. What is the Google service for email?
Gmail. Can I just say that I love that you don't know what it's called? Like, can we celebrate that for a minute? He did not know what Gmail was called. I think that's 2019. I'm going to call that a success.
Yeah, but in Germany we have several companies who are selling email services without surveillance, and you pay to Posteo or mailbox.org €1 a month. They have better services, they are more secure, and they have much growing subscribers. So this is an alternative we have to think about. Another alternative is you spoke about the digital commons in cities. I'm aware of Amsterdam and Barcelona. I would love to have something like this in Berlin, but we have one problem left. I don't want to have my personal data being exploded, being shared with everyone. We have to find ways to anonymize these data. In the moment, the problem is we can't really anonymize because we don't really have the perfect solutions for it, because if you anonymize all our travel data, for example, it might be easy for Google and co with lots of data to de-anonymize it. So we have to find ways to share everything, but without having the chance to de-anonymize. And this needs lots of science to figure out how to find privacy protection and privacy enhancing tools to anonymize things better.
Or an acceptance that it's not possible, which I'm just gonna put on the table for a minute. Hossein, question for you. I don't have a deep knowledge of Iran's economy, nor of its economic development interests. I mean, listening to this piece of it, I loved at this, these last 2 days hearing so much thought about the West. Because I'm so sick of it being so dominant, like you live in it and you're like, nope, there's so much more than this. And I mean, where in this grand discussion, which is global, truly, because the internet is global, truly, how do you see, Iranian, Persian, whatever, culture, as we've been talking, I'm sure you've had things firing off that are have nothing to do with the way we are discussing this.
No, the thing is, Iran's problems are more basic because of the sanctions. Iran has been very isolated technologically to a degree. That doesn't mean there are no Uber equivalents to Uber or Amazon or other kinds of similar services. But when you have, for example, you don't have access to Google Analytics because it's blocked in Iran as a result of sanctions, then obviously things are very different. So people's worries are not about data much, although maybe the government is collecting data about them, but it's not the Iranian government that is collecting data about them, because they don't have any of these services that people use in that sense. So the debate is quite also more basic, and the problems as a result, or as a reason, they are also basic. So unfortunately, few people are thinking about these in many countries in the global south because they have more basic problems.
Yeah, but I mean, if I may, in Canada, there are lots of people in my country who don't have access to clean water. Yeah, really. So like, I don't know that it's that we have different, maybe the government is, having a different level of theater about what is or isn't a basic problem, but I think one of the grand, grand cultural nightmares of the global political any discussion is America being like the people who should go tell people how to be, when, just to tie it to our very discussion, and I will tell you all right here very honestly, I didn't know how to start reacting when I saw on Twitter photos of children in cages, because my first response was like, isn't this why you have gun laws? Isn't this why you're allowed to bear arms? Because when this happens, you go, and then I had to stop and be like, okay, what am I saying? What am I doing? What hang on, like, hold on. A couple days pass, I sit up again and I say, there are hundreds of thousands of children in the United States that are also living in dire poverty, under dire, violently, abject conditions that aren't in cages. So what has normalized in the West, right? Like, what has normalized in North America? I don't understand how we assess violence anymore. Like, I'm just saying this, Hossein, because when you say this to me, like, we got bigger problems to worry about, I'm like, yeah, so do we. So do we. So how are we assessing the internet as a force? Because we all have really big issues that we're trying to address in terms of power, accountability, justice, access. Like, I don't think we're as far apart as we talk sometimes. I think that's not true anymore. So can I ask you again the same question, right? Like, let's say that, let's hold that you think maybe like some people have bigger issues or not, but I still think is it not power to have the internet and to be able to use it in these circumstances?
Yes and no, because I would say some of these trends are universal. It's happening everywhere. The trend from text to images, from rationality to emotions, from public to personalized and the privatized is universal. But then you have different degrees of this happening. And it needs to be a certain degree until people start panicking, and then you would have a debate about them. So in Iran, some of these trends have not reached a point where there is a collective panic. So for example, about the shift from text to images, there has been a panic because the new generations are reading less and less, and they're watching more and more, which is also universal. Actually, maybe it's even worse in developing countries where
Do you think that's bad?
Where they have where they have worse public education systems. I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm saying it's a new era, and it has negative and positive consequences. So one of the negative consequences is that when everything is becoming personalized, when the public is crumbling into the personalized, one of the most important things that is happening is the personalization of the truth, quote unquote. This obviously is happening more in the West because of the predictive mechanisms and the very deep data collection technologies that exist within the Western structures compared to many other developing countries. And this is important because when you don't have a public truth, then justice would become meaningless. When everybody lives in their own personalized truth, everybody would be happy not knowing how other people are actually living, if there is any justice done when you don't know anything about other people. And this is increasingly happening because it's not just the public transport that is becoming personalized in the form of Uber and Lyft and all that kind of stuff. It's not only the public education that is becoming personalized and privatized using MOOCs and all that kind of stuff. It's also happening in the architecture and in urban planning, the way the public space, the very literal public space is crumbling into the personalized and the privatized. The personalized aspect, which you might have not thought about, is actually even the time that you would spend in public transport, which would be one of the very, very few areas, any times that you would spend in the public space, is becoming personalized by people's earbuds and headphones. So it's also a voluntarily sort of process of personalization that we are also doing it ourselves. So the ultimate, I think, negative consequence would be the personalization of truth and the irrelevance of justice in that sense. And it's happening to different degrees in different countries.
Okay, I want to hear from both Katie and Markus on this before I interject a little bit, which is just to say, and then if there are questions, please stick your hand up and would love to respond to them. We don't have, I guess I don't feel as though truth is universal right now. I'm worried enough about how easy it is for people to feel comfortable as white people now. The same that it has been for 30, 40 years, you know? I guess what I'm saying is I don't think it was fine and now it's bad. It was bad and now it's worse, you know? And so I guess for me, I'm always going back to are we just looking at the edge of a problem that we had before and didn't resolve in the newspapers? Because I can tell you I have not seen I don't see representation in journalism. I've never seen editorial boards look like the people they should be serving if we want to talk about justice. This is well before that kind of personalization. So I guess just from both of you before we go to everybody else, how much of this is modern trouble and how much of this is just sort of antiquated but accelerated problem? That's how I feel. Technology just entrenches and accelerates current power dynamic. I don't know that I see it as new trouble. I just see it as faster old trouble. So I guess for me, I don't see resolving the internet as the way we're going to resolve the problem. I see it as institutional and bigger and older, and now we're just avoiding it. We're punting it again into the internet world, but it's actually bigger and structural. And
yeah, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, or I was born in 76, and I grew up in a media world where we had in Germany, in the beginning of my life, 3 television channels. Later we had some more, but we had a common view on the reality being shown on public news television shows in the evening, and one local newspaper on the table of your parents. And then the internet arrived. I know his argument, and I agree on the, I agree a lot. But for me personally, I totally love personalization. I totally love that I not need to know who's playing soccer and stuff like that, what most of the other people feel it's the most important thing in their life. I am so happy that I don't know what all these celebrities are doing, what other people are interested in. But when it comes to personalization, I see the problem that through the algorithms in Facebook and co, the reality is being created by these companies, and we have no democratic control if they create us a special political motivated reality or not.
I know, but this is what I was asking you. Do you not think that the newspapers did that before?
Yes, they did, but I'm a journalist, so I know how a journalist works, how editorial curation works. I think it was much more obvious how they choose what is being presented in newspaper than now, where Facebook is creating your timeline based on what your friends are doing, what other people are doing, and we don't really know if this is really the truth. And we have absolutely no checks and balances to control it, to take a look on how are your algorithms working. I'm not interested in or I'm not the person who has the technical understanding to go to their servers to take a look on their algorithms, but I would love to see some kind of media authority or privacy commissioners who have the power, who can go there and do the checks and balances, whether it's correct or not.
Right, but I mean, I guess, and Katie, to you, like I'm curious for your take on this, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that, isn't it funny how we were comfortable with white supremacist mass media forever, and now we're getting really, really worried about Facebook and Google when, like, I go back to Noam Chomsky, who said this a long time ago, is that the New York Times is a lapdog of the sitting president. America didn't get to hear about the violence it did to the rest of the world for decades. That was a big problem. So I guess I just don't understand why now we're getting hopped up about this with the media when, like, we didn't seem to mind before. Like, those things were constructive in the power dynamics that we live in today. So I just find it funny that we all are getting so worried about this personalization about news now.
When I said we had 3 TV channels in Germany in the past, it was public broadcasting channels. It was not a private-owned newspaper.
Good
and
response.
So we had checks and balances on public broadcasting. This is totally different to what Mark Zuckerberg is doing, and we have no clue about it.
I agree with you, and Katie, I want to hear your take. I mean, I hope you are understanding where I'm trying to push back on this stuff, because I'm just frustrated that now we're all getting mad about, like, the edge and ignoring the center, right? Like, the center is old. The problem is old. The power dynamics and the oppression is old. These are new flavors, right? So, like, are we going to solve them on the edge, or do we really have to get into the old stuff?
Right. I think it's a lot of flavors. It's an
it is.
overwhelming amount of flavors, and that's why, we're coming up with, oh God, this is too much. What is this? Who is that? To your point, I think I'm kind of on the last leg in terms of my upbringing. I caught like the tail end of the blog wave, but we still had at least an idea of what publication held what kind of stance, what could be expected of them. And when you introduce so many outlets, some of which we're not even sure are real, right? I think that's where kind of the hysteria is coming in, because it seems like where do we turn? Everything is bad, from my perspective. It's all garbage. But, having, I guess, the soul of independent media makers live on, from the punks into the hackers, and really myself functioning in some of the activist networks, that's where it became more apparent to me. So I don't know, hopefully that made sense, I'm not sure. Oh, we have 10 minutes. But yeah, I think really it is just the fact that we're overwhelmed, and even from a personal perspective, it's really difficult to say, like, what is the root cause of anything when you're completely flooded with something that's directly targeted at you? How can you see a truth? How can you question that whether you even have a full perspective? It's just a deluge of information, and if it's tailored to you, it makes the most sense, right? So hopefully that answers that question, but
it's a start, and I know Hossein wants to go, but I want to know. I see a hand over there, so let's let this person intervene.
Can I?
Is that okay? I'll bring it right back. Thank you. And there's a hand in the back. So we're going to go, we have just over 10 minutes. We're going to go lightning round on this. Okay? We're going to go fast.
Hi, everyone. I would like to know how the GDPR has been working out in the EU and how it has reverberated around the globe since we've had this for almost a year and a half in terms of a control mechanism, kind of a watchdog over privacy. I know it's been very controversial, at least this is what I've been perceiving, but I didn't do a deep dive into how it's been working out, so I'd like to hear from everyone how you've been perceiving it and its impacts. Thank you.
Okay, great. Can you maybe get to the, see the other question? So the General Data Protection Regulation is Europe's amped up data, privacy, all other things, management of data regulation. I have feelings about it, but I'll hold them. You guys want to go?
Can I just say
something
that I
as long
wanted
as
to say
it's,
before
and
this?
as moderator, I'm going to keep you to a quick
Yeah,
answer on this
yeah.
one. So yeah,
No, I
and
wanna
then we're going to
say-
go back to your thing.
I
So
want to
Hossein's got to think first.
I want to say two things have happened. One has been a change in degree of these trends. The other has been the change of kind in some of these trends. And these are two separate things. For the degree thing, for example, I would say that credit card companies and especially insurance companies have always used these mechanisms of prediction with the data that they had to increase their profits. So this is not new, but it's expanding to every aspect of society, all corporations, all institutions. So that's the change in degree. But the change in kind, the best example would be how the idea of public campaigning in politics has changed towards something that is targeted advertising, or something I call personalized campaigning. And this is really weird consequences, because now a politician can send out millions of completely conflicting and contradictory, even to sometimes, messages to all kinds of these personalized truths. And this is how the nature of political campaigning and politics is changing, and this is a change in kind.
Great. Okay, Markus, GDPR.
That's a question on GDPR. Yeah,
So again, General Data Protection Regulation.
Oh, thank you. Datenschutzgrundverordnung, it's called in Germany. We had strong data protection laws in Germany before the GDPR. So we have lots of experience, but the GDPR thing brought more attention that we have privacy laws. Before GDPR, a lot of companies thought they don't have to take care on privacy laws. Now there are big fines. And so we have now a stronger privacy protection, but lots of bureaucracy with it. But I think one big problem is unsolved, or several problems are unsolved. One big problem is that it's not really working against Google and Co. because they went to Europe to go to Ireland, or like Amazon to Luxembourg, because they have low taxes, they speak English in Ireland, and the state government promised, oh, we don't really take care about privacy. Come to us, bring jobs, no problem. And the GDPR should have solved the problem that I can't really go to court in Germany against Google if they do something wrong with the data. But it's not working because I still have to go to Ireland, and Ireland don't really have an interest to go after Google. This is one of the many unsolved problems. There are several other problems, like metadata is not really protected under the GDPR, with whom we are communicating and stuff like that. There should have been a sister law, the e-privacy directive on European level, but there was heavily lobbying by publishers together with Google. Our German publishers, they told the politicians, oh, it's the end of democracy if you are going against intransparent tracking, because our business model is built on, we don't really know who is, what other companies doing with the data of our customers. We are just earning money. And so a lot of problems are unsolved, but we have a higher attention that privacy rights exist.
Right, okay. I can tell you from Canada, I don't want the GDPR, and I think it's bad. Everyone thinks it's great. That's my little 2 cents on that as we go to the back row. I think there's a question, the hand up over there. You guys have been my nightmare. Everybody's like, we'll just do the GDPR. I'm like, no, I don't want to do the GDPR.
Thanks. I would also recommend or advocate a closer look to like the historical changes. I'm not sure whether it's just different flavors of the same kind of menu during history. Partly Hossein was already saying that this targeting is something that is qualitatively new. But what's also new is that from the 3 TV channels, they had like us as somehow customers, but like with the targeting, there's something else that is new, namely it's no longer us who are the customers. The customers are the politicians, the companies who buy the metadata. So there, we have something very new, namely that information is not made to inform us or corrupt us, or we are no longer the addressee, we are the material. The data that we produce is what Google and so on make a profit from other people and not from us. So it's not the advertising that is the issue, but it's like a complete new model of like sender and addressee. And I think this is important to be seen. Of course, oppression is as old as like humanity, but that doesn't help us to see this significantly new, I would say 21st century shift. I mean, that Shoshana Zuboff, I think, analyzed well in Surveillance Capitalism in the book. So it's just something I wanted to add.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. Got a hand in the front. Anybody on this side?
Yeah, thank you for the panel. I would have one question with regards to the 3 channels we used to have, and actually the role of public media now in times of the internet, because I don't see a role there yet from public media, and conversations inside public media are really like, they have so many question marks and nothing. There's like nothing. But I would be really interested to hear from you what you think about it.
Yeah, I'd love to hear everybody's take on that. My quick take: perfect place for public media to be important, because they're not ingesting public relations releases. Like they can actually critically report on the technology industry. Like I feel hopeful about it.
In Germany, we have to create the situation that the publishers did heavily lobbying on politicians that the public media, public broadcasting channels aren't really allowed to do a lot of stuff on the internet. So text is not anymore really allowed. They have to present videos and stuff like that. The idea of the publishers is, in the future, there is no more public broadcasting. But we are advocating for alternatives. We think we need, for example, 10% of the huge billion annual budget to take it, to put it on some public interest foundations on the internet, to give it away, this money to help to create community-based infrastructures, for example, community wireless networks on the local level, or non-profit media, or to develop alternative, decentralized, privacy-friendly social networks. So we would have an alternative tomorrow to all leave WhatsApp and Facebook.
I feel very similarly, maybe because but I think I mentioned Allied Media Projects earlier, and they are essentially a family of hundreds of projects that specifically deal in creating media, whatever that media may be, for liberation. So we are constantly having the funding conversation. So it would be wonderful to have that dedicated funding in understanding that the people that are most impacted by the issues of today are the ones generating the solutions and thus generating the narratives.
Yeah, one practical idea that I published something about in The Guardian this summer was for the public broadcast companies, a few of them in Europe, to join forces and to create a new publicly funded and maintained and governed social network for news. So they would share everything they produce on that platform, and then that could be the basis for other newspapers, private newspapers, to join sometimes, but within the collective sort of governance. Even Canada, Australia, public broadcasters could join, and I think it's very likely that it could become, because if they stop giving their content to Facebook, then or other private platforms, then they would drag people who are, for any reason, many of these public broadcast companies are quite popular still. So they can drag people to their own platforms, which is happening now. For example, I don't know if you've used BBC iPlayer, radio iPlayer, or if you're in the UK, they have their own app for television that people are using. So the same content, if it's the French, the German, and the Brits, for example, in the beginning, bring their content to this new platform for news, then it could be the basis for an alternative that is very viable. Technically, they are capable of doing it, and all other things. So that's maybe one practical idea.
I think we have 30 seconds for Markus.
I would totally disagree. I'm sorry. Because in Germany, we had publishers who thought the same. We don't go to Facebook and co and put there our content. And what happened was, we had lots of cases of public debate, and there were no public broadcasting content available on Facebook. So the people shared a lot of fake news content around because it was available. So this is, for me, an argument. You have to go there, but I believe these public broadcasting organizations, they must publish as much as possible under free licenses, so it can be put on Wikipedia and other platforms too.
Yeah, okay, so I love this as a wrap-up point, because it is 6:30, so we are done. But I think this, if anything, is the outcome of these kinds of conversations, is there's not one way out of here. And we need to make spaces to convene to figure out the approaches and the trade-offs and the benefits and what's the history and what's the way forward. And so I just love the sort of multitude of perspectives that you've all brought today. So thank you so much for the conversation. I've got lots to think about. Thank you for the questions.